Hey Art,
Hi, Mike. Good afternoon.
good. How are you?
Good. How are you feeling? I heard that you are a little bit sick.
Oh, my back. I threw out my back Sunday. So it's I went to the chiropractor and he's helping me
Yeah.
out.
I wish you a speedy recovery.
Well, I herniate I have a herniated disc that I did about 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And the doctor said you need surgery. And that's the
Oh.
last thing I want to do. So I was able to find a chiropractor that does some special ways of doing it, not traditional. And
Mhm.
he actually um, got me back where I'm acting normal. But
Good.
the problem is I don't keep on going back to him to kind of tune up like I should be, and
Yeah.
then something like this happens. So
Well,
oh
it's the
the
back pains. Yes.
yeah my the neurologist, I did an MRI and he calls me up at
Hmm.
the I just walked back in the house and he calls me up, says, I need to see you right away. I said, no, I'm going back east. And
Hmm.
he's fighting me. He needs to see me. And I said, finally, he said, well, if you got to go for business, go ahead, but take your scans with you in case something happens.
Take your stance.
Take your scans,
Oh,
the
scans.
MRI
Okay.
scans with you. And
Yes.
right away, that was like, holy geez, okay. And he was shocked to see me standing up with the amount that my disc is bulging.
Yeah.
It's in the perfect place. So um
I
it's a
there are some. I had that. Actually, I still have that issue a little bit.
yeah,
Herniated. It's not. It's a little bit. It's not a very serious herniated disc, but I stretch.
yeah.
There are some weird stretches, which if you want, I could share those stretches with you too. But again, doctors are every doctor's recommendation is different. Every
Yeah.
body is different.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's what I think, Art, is I think the stretching and the exercise to keep the core strong is
core,
probably
yes,
the most important thing.
yes, you gotta. I think what my doctor recommended me was use my core muscles more than my back muscles. So sometimes even now when I lift, actually every time now I lift, I use my thighs muscles more
Sure,
than
sure.
the back is. It's yeah. I mean the back is important organ of the body. So
Yep, yep. No,
I
it
have a
really is.
I have a question, Mike. I mean, to save our time in the RPA too, probably, it could be, should I wait to ask the question or should I?
No, yeah, whatever. Do you think people would benefit with the question?
I think so.
Then why'd you hold it?
Okay. Yeah. It's, but it's relating with like let's say, just a thought which came up in my mind that, let's say we are representing either seller or buyer side, both side, but relating to like if the buyer changes the down payment amount after the offer acceptance, and what could be the risks or ramifications overall. um, I just came recently, right before this meeting, I was talking to one of the title rep, and she mentioned that with the escrow officer, of course, and they mentioned that they have received many situations like this in the past where people say that they're paying, the buyer is going to pay all cash, but then after offer acceptance they jump into
Getting a loan.
and getting a loan. Yes.
Yeah. Well, um, the seller doesn't have to cooperate with the buyer in getting the loan if
Mhm.
it says all cash. However, if you remember in terms of the investigation contingency, it has
Yes.
17 days.
Yes.
And right below that, it allowed the buyer to do anything they wanted for 17 days. So
Mhm.
that also would allow an appraiser to get into the house within 17 days. So even though the seller doesn't want to cooperate on the
Mhm.
buyer getting a loan, first 17 days, the buyer can go in there for any reason, and that includes the appraisal. Now, here's the thing, Art. You could say all cash and you can get a loan. No one cares. It's when you say all cash and you can try to get a loan and don't get a loan,
Yes.
you better pay all cash or that deposit is really at risk. No
Awesome.
one cares as long as the seller as long as the buyer performs.
Performs.
That's it. And
Okay.
if you're gonna change, anything in the contract, you better not breach the contract, or else your deposit's gonna be just,
Risk.
really at risk.
Yes.
Especially when a seller's saying you're gonna buy all cash and then you put a loan on the property. Again, seller doesn't care as long as you perform. But
I see this is more like a tactic that probably to get their people's the own buyer clients off getting their offer accepted.
could be a tactic, but that buyer's got to show the amount of assets that
In the
they
proof of
have in
funds.
order to pay all cash.
Yes, in the proof of funds.
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
Sure. Good
So
afternoon, guys. How's everyone doing?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, I got 1 o'clock. We'll let's do this. Oops. Oops. Can everyone see that?
yes.
Are we good? Okay, cool. Does anyone want to remind me where we left off? I think we left off. Did we leave off here at the bottom of page 8, or do we in different place? It might be here. Did we talk about time
11
period?
M. I think 12.
Okay. Perfect. Good. Okay. All right. Are there any questions before we get started? Anyone have any comments? Okay, we'll get started then, okay? So we'll get started on the top of page 9. No material facts. It's important, and it's put in the contract 3 different places where the seller needs to disclose all material facts on the property, defects and material facts that affect the property, and anything that would scare a buyer and not wanting to buy the property. And where is that disclosed? Mostly it's disclosed in the TDS or an addendum to TDS or along those lines, but it needs to be disclosed to the buyer. And the buyer, when they do their investigation of the property, this paragraph 12 talks about everything that they should be looking at and considering in buying the property. They should talk about not just what's in paragraph B, which is the inspections and termite inspection or pest inspection, roof inspection, general home inspection, but it could cover everything else that is important to the property. For example, if it's in it's on a hillside, maybe you want to get a soils report. Septic tank, you want to get a septic inspection. well inspection. You want to do your investigation to make sure that you can get fire insurance. Everything in here are things that a buyer should be considering when they buying a property. And the seller has to make the property available to the client. What's new in this contract is that if it is in an area of the property, the seller is not obligated to move furniture or move personal possessions so the buyer can do inspection. For example, if the garage is full, the garage is full. You can, as a buyer, you can't make the seller move everything out of the garage for you to do an inspection. So that's one thing. The other thing that is not allowed unless the seller approves is you can't do any invasive or destructive investigations. In other words, if you have a 50-foot retaining wall in the backyard, you can't knock down half of the retaining wall just to see how the retaining wall is built. That's an invasive investigation and not allowed unless the seller approves it. Let's see what else. The other thing new to this contract is you are not allowed to put any boring holes or drilling into the stucco or material or same type of material to do investigations on that. But other than that, you have to make the property available. And if you, as I was talking to Art earlier, even if you have no contingencies, the investigation contingency in the grid on paragraph 3, below that, the buyer still has the right to get in and out of the property for 17 days. They can get in there, they could do investigations, they could do measure for carpets or measure painting or do whatever they want in the 17 days, and the seller is giving them access to that. It doesn't mean they have the right as a contingency, but they have the right to get inside. Okay, let's see what else. The other thing is seller needs to keep the utilities on through possession date. There's no sense in being able to do an investigation of the plumbing and not have the water turned on. Same thing with gas for the heater, or just plain utilities, the electrical for the electrical panel, and making sure all the utilities are working. So that needs to stay on. Other than that, everything else is the same as what it was years gone by. The paragraph E just simply is a CYA, and it allows basically buyers and their agents to go inside, and if there is any type of work done or anything like that, it's not the seller's responsibility. Matter of fact, if we just had one of these in the Santa Cruz office, the buyer was doing work, was doing Section 1 work, and because it was a VA loan, you needed the Section 1 clearance before you can get the loan. So the buyer hired the termite company to do the fumigation, and the agent needed to get what's called a notice of non-responsibility, and that's a form that really limits the seller's risk for the buyer doing repairs. It puts the burden back on the buyer and the buyer's vendors instead of the seller. So whenever there's work being done prior to close of escrow by the buyer, you should have a notice of non-responsibility form, NNR, and it's in paragraph E. Okay, any questions on that? Has anyone ever used that NNR form before?
Not me.
No, rarely, right? In these days doesn't happen, but it could, and you just need to protect your seller for that. Title investing. Now, one of the things that takes place when you do your buyer consultation, what should take place is that you should go over this paragraph with your client and basically let them know that there's different ways to take title. And it really involves death and taxes. And, if you're one person buying, it's really simple, sole and separate property. But two people buying could be a whole variety of different things. It could be a joint tenancy, tenancy in common, community property. It's a whole 8 or 9 different options. What's important for you is to make sure that you can give them a list from your favorite title company on how to take title, and they should talk to their accountant or their attorney and determine which is the best way to vest in the property. You're not an expert. You don't know. The title company's not an expert. They don't know either. So don't make the mistake of not addressing this. So when there is a sign off in front of the notary, and the notary says how you're taking title, and everyone looks at each other, you didn't do your job. So just make sure that you present to them that there's different options, and they need to talk to one of their favorite CPAs or accountants or attorneys on how best to do that. Okay. The other thing that comes up is when you do a preliminary title report. Mostly the times when we look at the prelim, we're looking at it with the rest of the seller's disclosures. And that prelim could be a month old. What's important is once you enter into contract, then there is another prelim that's going to be sent within a couple days from the title company that'll have your buyer's names on the front page. And that's the important one. That's the one that is giving the insurance of title will be on that second prelim, not the first one. Many times it's the same, but sometimes it could be different. Maybe there's a new encumbrance on the property. Maybe there's a new lien on the property. But take a look at that prelim. It's more important than the first one on that. Okay. Let's get into contingencies. So we're talking about the paragraph 14, which is basically the same of what the old contract was, is that let's talk about the contingencies. We talked about the loan contingency. We talked about the appraisal contingency. This next one is the investigation contingency, and that the investigations could also be the HOA, could be a whole bunch of different things. The pest inspection, the general home inspection, roof inspection, everything else in here, the ability to get insurance. A lot of these different things are associated with this paragraph. So what should happen, and basically right now it's our normal. It's been our normal for a long time, but not having any contingencies is over this long is abnormal, to say the least. Eventually it'll get back to where we have contingencies and the ability for a buyer to look more carefully and in the condition of the home than what they're basically doing right now. But here's what happens in this investigations and of everything that they should look at in paragraph 12, which talks about the investigations, and this is all tied together in paragraph 14. Sooner or later, after, say we have a contract that has contingencies, and it's maybe the investigation of contingencies, and the default on the contract is 17 days. Come day 17, the buyer either removes the contingency, or he decides that he's not satisfied with the investigation, and he could always cancel the contract. Or he could do a third thing, which is ask for repairs. And the form is called CAR Form RR, Request for Repairs. That's basically what the buyer should be doing: canceling, accepting it, or asking for repairs. The fourth thing that could happen is that the buyer doesn't do anything and time just moves on. And in that case, sooner or later, usually it's the buyer's agent that wakes up. I'm sorry, the seller's agent wakes up and says, hey, Mr. Buyer's agent, your clients need to remove contingencies, put up or shut up. And the way to do that is there's a form called the notice to perform. And that is where the seller says, Mr. Buyer, you have 2 days to either do this action, or in this case, remove the contingency, or we can cancel the contract. So it's a pretty powerful tool, but that's what happens. The benefit also is that the seller doesn't have to wait till day 17. He could do it in advance. How far in advance? 2 days in advance. So in day 15, he can give the notice to perform that, hey, your contingency removal is due in 2 days. And please remove your contingency or cancel the contract. So that takes care of the notice to perform. And notice to perform is done on every action item that a buyer is supposed to do, except for one action item. So if the buyer doesn't give their initial deposit in escrow, what does the seller need to do? Can he just cancel the contract?
Notice to perform.
They have a notice to perform is required. Putting in your deposit, removing contingencies. What action on a part of the buyer you do not use a notice to perform? Anyone want to take a wild stab at that one?
Closing escrow.
Closing escrow. What form needs to be used?
Notice to perform to close escrow.
No, it's called the demand to close escrow.
Oh, yeah. I was just
Close
saying.
enough. But anyway, it's two separate forms. Don't mix them up. If you give a notice to perform when you're supposed to give them a demand to close escrow, it means nothing. It's totally different verbiage, totally different time elements. If you give me a notice to perform and you want to give me a demand to close instead, but you give me notice to perform, I'm going to ignore it and nothing happens until you finally realize that you gave me the wrong form, and then you have to give me the demand to close escrow. And then the 3 days starts ticking from when you legally give me the proper document. It's happened in our office before where we were giving notice to performs, and we should have been given demand to close escrows, and we wound up closing 5 days late because they didn't give us the right form. And we were still able to close escrow. So we got either the removal of contingency, we got the cancellation because they don't like the condition of the home. They want something to be repaired, and then the seller could say yes, no. He can negotiate. Maybe it's a new roof that the buyer wants, and the seller's willing to give $5,000 towards the new roof. And then it goes back and forth until you either have a yes or a no, and then you move on from there. The other thing that a seller can do is he could ignore the buyer's request. If the buyer wants some repairs done, the seller legally can say, I'm not going to listen to you and just ignore you. He has that right to do that. I'm not saying that's the best thing to do, but it is within his right, the seller's right to ignore the buyer's request. And then the seller can simply give a notice to perform, to put up or shut up. So everyone understand the different options that the seller and the buyer have on that? With this paragraph 14? I wanted to
Yes.
make sure we covered notice to perform. When we covered demand to close escrow. Okay, now, the other thing with notice to perform and the demand to close escrow, it could be the buyer giving it to the seller. It doesn't necessarily mean that the seller always gives it to the buyer. So if the buyer's ready to close escrow and the seller is not, and he's breaching the contract, the buyer can give the demand to close escrow. Same thing if the seller is not giving the required documents on time that the seller is obligated to do, the buyer can give a notice to perform. So it's not just the buyer that gets nailed with these demand to close escrows or notice of performance. It could also be the seller as well. Okay. Paragraph F talks about that if a buyer removes his contingency, he is deemed to have done his investigations. And don't say that I was forced to remove my contingencies. I never even looked at what's going on. That's a bunch of malarkey. You read paragraph F and it tells you that the buyer by remove his contingencies is saying that he did his investigations and he reviewed all his reports and he feels comfortable with moving on. Okay. Removal of seller contingencies, same thing. Very few seller contingencies in the contract. None of them are in this pre-printed form. It would have to be something that the seller is asking for, such as contingent on them finding replacement property. So that's a seller contingency. We covered demand to close escrow, effective cancellation of deposits. That is the if the buyer cancels the contract and has a legitimate reason to cancel the contract, the seller needs to sign off the cancellation and the disbursement of the deposit back to the buyer as soon as possible. Failure to play sour grapes and keep the deposit in escrow, because remember, the escrow company isn't doing anything unless they get joint instructions. So in that case, the buyer says, hey, I want my deposit back. And if the seller doesn't say anything or says, no, the deposit stays there, and there's no argument on this, the buyer has a right to cancel the contract, get his deposit back. The seller could be a breach and be in a violation of Civil Code 1057.3, and that could cost the seller an additional $1,000 for that kind of little tantrum that he's doing. But bottom line is, if the buyer has reasonable, legitimate reasons to back out of the contract, the seller needs to sign off and return the deposit. However, if the seller thinks that there is not a legitimate reason to back out, if the seller thinks that the buyer did a breach of contract, then he's not required to release that money to the buyer. It can stay in the escrow until it gets legally resolved. First step is usually mediation. The next step is arbitration. And we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. Okay. Repairs in paragraph 15, same as the old contract. Basically, in repairs, a handyman can do repairs or the seller can do repairs. And unlike the PRDS contracts, which says that that it needs to be a licensed contractor. So in this paragraph 15, it's saying that not everything matches, even the same color, the same dye lot. It may not be a perfect match, but the seller is doing his best to match, carpeting or different types of tile They're trying to match it to the existing tile on that. But it does say it may not be exact. The other thing is if the seller does some work, then he's gonna keep the invoices and the paid receipts for repairs so that it can be given to the buyer. Paragraph 16 is the walkthrough. And if you remember yesterday, we talked about they changed it from up to 3 days from close of escrow to just 5 days. Yeah, it used to be up to 5 days for a buyer to conduct his walkthrough. Now it's set on the 5th day from close of escrow to do your verification of condition. Prorations and property taxes. These are things that are paid for up until the close of escrow that the seller is responsible for. And then after close of escrow, the buyer is responsible for. So one of the big things of prorations would be property taxes. Seller's responsible for the property taxes up until the close of escrow, and then buyer takes on the rest of the property taxes after close of escrow. Other things that can be prorated, rents can be prorated, where up until close of escrow, the rents would go until close of escrow, the seller would keep those rents. After close of escrow, the buyer gets those rents. Paragraph 18, A basically says that if there's a buyer broker agreement, this will be included in the contract. And this basically ties the buyer broker agreement in paragraph 18A, making it part of the contract. Paragraph 18B is kind of another CYA, and it basically says that the agent did not decide on the price and did not, ultimately is between the buyer and the seller. The agent does not warranty the condition of the home. Let's see what else. We don't identify defects. We do in Avid, but that's just a visual, and we don't go all over the place. Basically, we're not responsible for almost anything. The other thing is that, you look at the fence lines, we don't guarantee that that's really where the property lines are. So everything that you could think of that we're not responsible for is in this paragraph 18B. Okay, paragraph 19. This gives the power to the escrow company to do what they need to do. So everything in here, first of all, they don't do anything unless it's both buyer and seller have mutual instructions. So if there's not mutual instructions, the escrow company holds up its hands and says, guys, get it together and then let me know what you want to do. The escrow instructions that the escrow company goes by is the purchase agreement. It's written escrow instructions, and it gives the basically the transaction to the escrow holder, and everyone's going to follow this contract, which are also the escrow instructions. Okay. Paragraph 20, selection of service providers, another CYA, that even though we give you recommendations, we don't stand behind them. And if they screw up, it's them, it's not us. 21, multiple listing service. This is saying that the comps are going to be recorded in the MLS. So the sales price will be in there, the pictures are in there, everything's in there. And it's really for the purpose of us, for a benefit of us, so that we have comparables and helps us price property in the future. Paragraph 22, attorney's fees. It's a common clause that the prevailing party shall get their attorney's fees paid for. Now, again, attorney's fees only apply to who's a party of this contract. Buyer and seller are parties to the contract. Real estate agents are not parties to this contract. Paragraph 23, assignment. This is a little bit changed, but it's almost the same with a little variant to it. The assignment used to be that the seller shall accept an assignment, and there is no time frame to that. Basically, shall not unreasonably withhold. That's better than accepting. Shall not unreasonably withhold, and it can be done in any part of the transaction. Well, this new contract says that the seller shall not unreasonably withhold approval of the assignment within the first 17 days of the contract, of the acceptance. After 17 days, the seller does not need to approve the assignment. So there could be a rejection after 17 days. So that's an important difference. Okay, 24, no discrimination. 25 talks about definitions. The important ones in here that I like is J, day, means calendar days. And the only thing with the deposit, if you look back at paragraph 3, the grid, is that delivery of deposit to escrow is based on business days. That's the only difference. So everything in the contract means calendar days, except the deposit into escrow is a business day. The other thing is if an action has to take place on a Saturday or Sunday or a holiday, it automatically goes to the next business day. So if a contingency removal is scheduled for Sunday, it automatically go to Monday as long as it's not a holiday on Monday. Delivery, or delivered. This talks about basically, and we'll get to this in a little bit, where they changed things before. We used to have confirmation of acceptance. Now it's just delivered. And what constitutes delivered? I'll get to that in a minute. Okay. Terms and conditions of this offer. Everything needs to be initialed and signed, no verbal. Everything needs to be in writing. And this also talks about paragraph 26, talks about when one party initials arbitration or liquidated damages and the other party does not initial arbitration or liquidated damages, you do not have a contract. However, if you use a counteroffer, the counteroffer pre-printed form says if one party initials and the other party doesn't, we have an agreement, except that paragraph is not included in the transaction. That's why it's important to get when you get a counteroffer, to also get the contract back, making sure that the seller signs liquidated damages and arbitration if your buyer wants it, along with the counteroffer. Now, sometimes we get lazy or caught up with a whole bunch of different offers, but it's important that you know as a buyer's agent that your buyer wants liquidated damages, and you need to make sure. Wait 1 second, guys. I got a little 1-month-old that's coming to visit me. Katie's little baby. Okay, let's continue on. There you go. Nice seeing you guys.
Good seeing you too.
Sorry about that. Okay, the counter offer is important. But it's also important to get the signed contract, purchase agreement by the seller as well on that. Because let's take the scenario. I write up an offer and I'm writing it to Art. Art's got the listing. And he gives me a counter offer and my buyers accept the counter offer and I do not have the original contract signed by the seller. He gives me the counter offer. He gives me after I give him the counter offer saying we have a deal, he gives me back the contract and the seller did not agree to liquidated damages. So he didn't sign liquidated damages. What happens with a counter offer that the buyer has agreed upon? What do we have here? Do we have a valid contract?
It's void.
Nope. We do
Not
have a
void.
valid contract. The contract in the counter offer says that if one paragraph is signed by one party and not signed by the other party, we have a valid contract, but that paragraph is not included. So in this case, Art gave me a contract back. We are signed. We are in escrow, but my buyer doesn't have liquidated damages because the buyer signed it, but the seller didn't. So we don't have liquidated damages, but we have a valid agreement. Now, I would agree with you if there was no counter offer and the seller, the buyer signs liquidated damages, seller does not, we don't have a valid contract. So that counter offer changes things. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that you have to make sure that you look at the original contract signed by the seller to make sure that liquidated damages and arbitration are included in that. Okay, any questions on that?
Yes, Mike, I have a question
Yes, sir.
regarding the counter offer example, which you just mentioned.
Yes.
So when we receive the counter offer, so I am the listing agent.
Okay.
And I received a counter offer from the buyer agent. So
In other words,
to protect,
Art, what's happened is I'm the buyer's agent. I give you an offer.
Mhm.
You counter as a seller back to the buyer. Correct?
okay.
Well,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So now is your thing now that I'm giving you back another counter offer?
No.
Okay, all right.
It's the situation one, which you just
Okay.
mentioned.
All right,
Now,
so you're giving me a counter offer.
I'm
the
giving you a
buyer.
counter offer and seller counter offer or, seller multiple counter offer one.
Okay,
And when I'm giving it to you, I did not sign on that arbitration and the mediation clause.
yep,
And I gave it to you with that, just attaching with the seller counteroffer or SMO multiple counteroffer one.
yep,
And the buyer agent receives it, and the buyer agent, excluding the mediation paragraph and the arbitration paragraph, everything else is executed. That's what it means.
no,
When-
the mediation is part of the contract despite the arbitration clause, has nothing to do with it. So when you give me back, you give the buyer back the counter offer,
Mhm,
and you also gave me back the contract without the arbitration signed,
mhm. It's
Yeah.
still valid.
it's still valid because you have a counter offer. Now, I, the first question is, did you purposely omit it or did you make a mistake? That's my
Uh,
first question. That's what, me as a buyer's agent, that would be my first question. Did you forget about this? Or does the seller not want to do arbitration?
Well, I would focus more on what impact it's causing to the buyer's agent as a seller's agent. I mean,
Well,
regardless
there's
of the
no impact.
intention,
There's no impact at all. It's first you need to identify whether it's a mistake or whether it was what was on purpose.
Okay.
And once you find out that, if it's
Mhm.
a mistake, seller re-signs that paragraph. If it's not a mistake, then it's a negotiating, just like anything else. You might as well be $100,000 off on the price. You have to come to agreement on the arbitration and the liquidated damages.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, sure. Okay, time is of the essence. This is an important paragraph, and basically what it says, if you're following the contract and and you come across a timeline that is not going to be met, you need to address it in writing, get an extension, so that you keep time is of the essence. There's nothing worse than failing all the necessary timelines, such as when the deposit goes in escrow. That's the first one, usually. Then it might be the contingencies, timelines. When are they going to be removed? Then it might be all these other things. And so if no one is following the original timelines, you can't enforce the close of escrow date. No judge in his right mind is gonna say, hey, the buyer is not abiding by the close of escrow date. And the judge is going to say, well, what timelines have been met and not been met? Well, you didn't meet any of them. Therefore, what difference does it make that this day of close of escrow take place here? Buyer has an extra week to do what they need to do. So you got to keep the time is of the essence going and change any type of action item that's not going to be done on time. Make sure you get an agreement between the buyer and the seller for a new timeline on that. Okay. Paragraph 28 is just the wherever there is a signer, whether it be a buyer or seller, if they're an individual and they're signing on behalf of a trust, we have to have that representative capacity agreement in there. Okay, any questions on page 13? Okay, let's start off with liquidated damages. We talked about this a few different times. Both 29 has initials and 31 has initials. They are optional paragraphs that both the seller and the buyer have to agree to. Either the buyer and the seller agree not to have liquidated damages and don't initial there, or they both have to agree to have liquidated damages and both have to initial there. Again, as I said earlier, if you're off and you have one person signing and the other person not signing, you don't have a meeting of the minds. Contract's not valid. Okay, so let's talk about liquidated damages. What does this paragraph mean? Paragraph simply means that everyone is going to put a limit on what the seller's loss is if the buyer is to breach contract, and the seller will be allowed to keep the deposit in escrow or 3% of the purchase price, whichever is less. So for an example, if I'm buying the property at $1 million and I back out the last day, and seller is at a loss and resells it for 900,000, he lost $100,000 on me breaching the contract. If everyone signed liquidated damages, he is only allowed to keep 3% of the deposit or 3% of the purchase price or the deposit, whichever's less. So that's why everyone likes to see 3% of the purchase price in the deposit, whether it be the initial deposit or the initial deposit increased deposit. But let's get back to that scenario again. If the seller lost $100,000 and everyone agreed to sign liquidated damages, the seller can only go after me for the deposit or 3%, whichever is less. However, if we agreed not to have liquidated damages and the same thing applied, $1 million sale, he resells it for 900,000, what is his loss? His loss is 100,000. What can he go after me for if liquidated damages is not signed? Can he go after me for the full loss? Yes, $100,000. So that's why typically buyers like to have liquidated damages initialed and limiting their at risk for breaching the contract. Any questions on liquidated damages?
Yes, Mike.
Yes.
Hi. I didn't know that that was an optional page. I thought that or sorry about that.
Okay.
I didn't know that
Did you feed him recently?
he did, but he's growling at my food.
Okay.
So if they don't sign, and this means that they can only go, the seller can go after just the deposit.
If they don't sign, then liquidated damages is not in effect. And the seller can go after the buyer for full loss.
Okay,
If they do sign, then liquidated damages is part of the agreement. Therefore, the maximum that the seller can go after the buyer for is 3% of the purchase price or the deposit, whichever is less.
okay. And do you see that often? That they don't
See-
sign?
See what, you know what, I'm gonna tell you that most of the time, I see it every once in a while, but it's usually a mistake.
Okay,
But a mistake or not, it's reality.
right.
So that's why I would love to get the contracts the day that you sign them, so I could review them quickly. And you have another set of eyes looking at the purchase agreement.
Right.
It doesn't help when you guys do a deal, which is great, and then sit on putting them in command for 3 weeks. So I look at them a week before close of escrow. That's a problem.
Okay.
So the sooner you upload them into command, the sooner I'll be able to look at it to make sure that these mistakes are corrected. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, paragraph 30. You can see this is different than mediation is different than arbitration. So the first thing that everyone agrees to in paragraph 30 is that the buyer and the seller agree to mediation if there is a dispute. And mediation is really, it's meeting with a third person who is the mediator. And his job is to settle the case. And he doesn't have to be siding with the right person or not. His job is to settle the dispute. They're very successful at doing that. But mediation, the buyer and seller agree to mediate. So they sit down in front of a neutral third party, and they may or may not come to a resolution. And the mediator might say, this is what you should do. No one has to listen to them. But what they do have to go is they have to go to mediation. But no one has to listen to them. And there's successful mediations and there's unsuccessful mediations. But you fulfill the duty by going to the mediation. There's some exclusions to mediation. And the number one exclusion to mediation is small claims court. And small claims court is $10,000. So you could sue for $10,000 or less and not have to go to mediation, or you don't have to go to arbitration. Lots of disputes start off involving less than $10,000. So Anyway, so it's mediation is not binding. And someone can show up and then leave and say, I don't agree to anything. And you fulfilled your obligation for mediation. The next one is arbitration, which again can be elected or not elected. We don't care whether the buyers or sellers elect arbitration or not. Doesn't matter to us. But what is important is that both parties agree that mediation is part of the contract or mediation is not part of the contract. With that said, all my clients opt for mediation, for arbitration. Every one of them, except my attorney clients, they don't like arbitration. Maybe because their time is free in the court, so they rather do that. But what arbitration is, it's a little bit different than the mediation. Number one, it's binding. So an arbitrator makes a ruling, and that's what's going to take place. It's not something that optional that the buyer or seller can elect to follow or not. It is taking place. The benefit of arbitration is that it's a little bit cheaper, a little bit quicker. Those costs are adding up though, and I don't know how much cheaper it is these days, but those are the two benefits of arbitration. The negative thing about arbitration is that the arbitrator can just make a ruling, and it's almost impossible to dispute that or to appeal. It is, I'm going to say it's impossible to appeal an arbitrator's ruling. The other thing that I find difficult with is that the arbitrator can make a ruling which is contrary to what the case law is. There could be a previous case where the judge has said this, this, and this, and the arbitrator doesn't have to follow the case ruling. So it's, with that being said, most of our clients elect for arbitration. We don't care. Matter of fact, if you don't do arbitration, both the buyer and the seller agree not to arbitrate. And when there's a dispute, you can agree at that time that you both want to do arbitration, and that's totally okay. So what's in the offer, maybe not arbitration, and it could be agreed upon a year later after close of escrow when the dispute takes place to agree to have an arbitration. It's totally up to the buyer and the seller after the fact. Okay, any questions on 14? Okay, we're getting there. Okay, next top of the page, paragraph 32 is the buyer's offer. So this is the expiration of the offer. This talks about that the buyer is agreeing to all the terms and conditions and outlined in all the pages. He initialed the bottom of each page, and he signs paragraph 32. The expiration of the offers back in the grid. That grid, I think normally it says 3 days at 5 p.m. But you can make it anything you want. But that refers to paragraph 30A, which refers to paragraph 3 in the grid. Okay, if you're doing a representative capacity where the seller or where the buyer is a corporation or something like that, or is a power of attorney, you can check the box 32B, and that'll take care of it. You don't need a representative capacity form, although you can have it. It's not necessary. So the buyer sign in paragraph D and date. And if you have more than 2 buyers, you check this box and you use the Sierra form ASA, additional signature. So now you have a completed contract by the buyer. He's initialed every page. He's initialed or not initialed the liquidated damages and arbitration, and he signed here. And this offer is good for whatever time frame it is in paragraph 3. Now it's given to the seller. Seller could do one of a few different things. He could ignore the offer, which I don't recommend, but he's not obligated to respond to an offer. That's the first thing. The other thing, he can accept the offer. He could counter the offer, or he could just reject the offer. I don't like the first option of ignoring it. I don't think that's in the spirit of how we conduct business. So I like to eliminate that from our options. But it is an option that the seller can do. The second thing is, if he accepts the offer, he signs in paragraph D. Just like in 32, the buyer signs it, the seller's initials, all the pages, and signs in paragraph 33D. The other thing that the seller can do that we talked about is that the offer is not accepted. I used the word about 2 minutes ago, rejected. This is a little bit more soothing. Offer not accepted. Sounds better than just offer rejected. So if the seller is going to not accept this offer, let's get them to initial in here in the signatures. Okay. And initials and the date. Let's talk about the other option is a seller counter offer. This box here. And this box would be either the seller counter offer or the seller multiple counter offer, depending. So you got to check this box if there's going to be a counter offer, and then write on the counter offer all the terms and conditions that are not acceptable, that need to be changed by the seller. Seller fills out that counter offer, signs it, and then sends it back to the buyer's agent. I'll briefly go over the backup offer addendum. If you are taking this, you're not taking this deal because you've got another deal in first position, but you want to take this deal and make it a backup offer in second position, that's where you would take the backup addendum and check this box, backup offer addendum, and that would be completed. I'm not a big fan of backup offers. I don't know, it's just the way I did real estate, but it's okay. I'm not a big fan as a listing agent to have a backup offer. As far as a buyer goes, having a backup offer is fine, as long as if you're making other offers on properties, you withdraw the offer before the backup offer seller tells you you're now in position. So you got to be a little more careful when you're doing backup offers and representing a buyer. And to be honest with you, as representing the seller, I don't like a backup offer because it really ties the seller's hands, that should his deal break up, he's got to go to the backup offer. He can't put it back on the market. And in this day and age, with the seller market conditions, I really think as of today, prices keep going up each month. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on backup offers. You're free to use them. It's okay. Just be careful how you use them and make sure that you use up the backup offer addendum. The worst thing in the world is you're signing 2 contracts for two buyers without having a backup offer addendum. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, I'm going to go to this next box. This is the real estate broker section, and this is where you identify the the buyer's brokerage firm and the buyer's agent. Buyer's broker form's right here. The company DRE number's here. The agent is here, the buyer's agent is here, and the license number and the date. What they've added is designated electronic delivery address. This is where the buyer's agent's email goes and the buyer's agent text goes. What is important is remember we talked about delivery of acceptance? Delivery of acceptance is where delivery is made when it is delivered to either the email or to the text number. So that is now what constitutes delivery. And what the delivery is when you have a completed transaction. So let's get through this first and we'll go over it in more detail. So we got the buyer's agents in A, their email, their text, their address, the seller's brokerage, company, DRE number, agent, DRE number. And then the same thing for the seller, email and text. The seller's agent's email and text. If you remember the old contract, it had the acceptance by the seller, and below that had confirmation. That was confusing because people had confusion over what constituted a confirmation, wasn't needed, even though it was in bold letters saying that confirmation is not needed to have a valid contract. What you need is delivery of acceptance. The forms committee decided we don't need the confirmation anymore. We're just going to have, and we're going to fine tune what delivery means. So delivery, what it meant before this contract was you sent it to the agent's email. The question was, if he never picked it up, was that delivery or not? This contract explains it better. So it is delivery of acceptance is when it is emailed to the designated address. So I don't care if I'm an agent, seller's agent, and I make a deal, the seller signs the contract, I deliver it to the email address of the buyer's agent, that constitutes delivery. I don't care if the agent never picks it up. I have proof that the email went to that address. That is considered delivery. And vice versa, if you're talking about counters and things like that, it's both the seller's brokerage and the buyer's brokerage. The email designated address is what constitutes a delivery on that. Anyone have any questions on that? It's a little bit different than what we had last year, but I think it really cleaned it up fairly well. Okay, the next thing is the box where the escrow holder completes and fills out what they need to fill out in this contract. And I always, once in a while, you know, the escrow companies are pretty good filling this out. On occasion, we don't get a cooperative escrow officer filling it out. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. As long as the seller and the buyer have completed everything, I'm okay with that. It would be nice for the escrow holder to do what their job entails, which is being a part of this, acknowledging that the agreement, and they're going to follow the agreement to the letter because that's their job on that. Okay, the last box here is the presentation of the offer. So we talked about you could do a offer not accepted, or rejection, as I like to call it still, or a presentation of the offer proving that the offer was presented to the seller, but he is not doing anything. I don't like this one either, but it is available for sellers to do that. I just assume either the seller object, the seller counters, the seller accepts, or the seller does not accept the offer. And we go from there. The presentation is, I think is, personally, I don't think is needed, but other higher ups thought it was. Is there any questions? Anything that we want to go back to? Anything that you want to share?
I have a question.
Yep,
So the contract is still considered an as-is contract, correct?
that is correct.
So if we submitted an offer and then they accepted it and they just gave us an addendum, they asked us to sign an addendum that said the contract is as is. It's redundant, right?
Yes, what were they trying to accomplish?
You know, I mean, I know when they called us, they said, well, you know, we're not going to paint or do any repairs or anything. And we said, well, we know that. I'm guessing that the reason that they were concerned is because we still have a property contingency. But we're not
Okay.
expecting to ask for any repairs. We understand that because,
Well, here's the purpose of the verification or the walkthrough. The purpose of the walkthrough is to determine that the home is in the same condition as what it was at the time of acceptance. So if there is a hole in the wall, or if there is marks on the wall that weren't there before, then it is a requirement that the seller brings the property back to the condition as what it was at the time the offer was accepted.
okay,
So that has nothing to do with as is, that's totally separate. So maybe they were just posturing because you still had a contingency period. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, I'm guessing they were posturing a little bit because they were concerned about that contingency. This has nothing to do with, in my mind, with the verification either, if you're looking at my other question.
Okay, you know what, I figured that you're talking, you could ask me. What was the other question?
The other question about verification of property?
Yeah, please.
Oh, that one I was just gonna ask, because that 5 days seems so goofy to me. I don't know why they would change that, because 5 days exactly, but so if we want to do it at 4 days or 2 days, do we just, we can just clear it with the listing agent in writing, right? Just
Well,
say, hey, we're coming Tuesday instead of Thursday or whatever.
basically, Libby, what it amounts to is a change in the contract. And any change that you make in a contract should be in the form of an addendum.
Yeah.
I just don't know how the other agents are reacting to that.
I'm surprised at that change because it's such a,
You know, what?
seems useless.
I don't know. I don't understand it either. I'll find out more.
The other reason that it's useless, just in case you need another argument that I'm sure you've already thought of. 5 days, often the sellers haven't even moved out yet, so we don't want to do the verification until they're out.
I get you. I
Okay,
get you. And so I guess just do it in advance and have an agreement with the listing agent. And if it's gonna be 1 day prior to close of escrow, hell, to be honest with you, I don't even know when close of escrows dates are scheduled versus when they happen. So, you know, I think if you communicate with the listing agent, just square it away. I think everyone's in the same boat.
yeah, I would agree. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Anything else?
Oh, but just back to confirming, it's okay to sign the addendum as is, even though it's redundant.
Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. There are times when we want to just keep hitting our head against the wall. And there's other times that we just want to walk around the wall just to get to where we want to go. And
Yeah.
that would be the case where I would say, fine, just sign it because it is as is.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you.
Sure. Anything else, guys? I'm getting done earlier and earlier. I'm gonna have to throw in some more of Mike's stories in here. But anyway, if there's nothing else, here's your time. Speak your piece.
Maybe a quick one, Mike. In regard this is Frank. Wait. The 17, like they say, the 5 days you were talking about as is. So if the appraisal comes, it requires a little longer to repair. So in the buyer size, what is you prospect with an,
I'm not sure what you mean, Frank, but if their dates if the actions take longer than the dates specified in the contract, you need to, time is of the essence, you need to change the dates to reflect how long you need to conduct those things you need to do. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or not, but anything that is changed, you work with the other agent and put it in writing in the form of the addendum, whether it's whether it's any action item, whether it's a removal of contingency, whether it's changing the walkthrough date, whether it's changing the deposit, initial deposit in there, anything like that.
yeah, that was leading to that.
Okay.
Great, so that helped. Thank you.
Okay, anything else, guys? If not, have a great Wednesday.
Cool. You too,
Thank
Mike.
you,
Thank
Mike.
Take care now.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.